My name is David Ruiz, and I've spent most of my life in the deserts of New Mexico. As an amateur archaeologist and historian, always been fascinated by the rich cultural tapestry of the Southwest, where ancient legends and modern life intertwine. But my interest in these legends took a dark turn during an expedition to an isolated part of the desert known as the Whispering Dunes. It started with a tip from a colleague about a series of petroglyphs that had recently been uncovered by a sandstorm. These carvings, he said, could provide new insights into the lives of the ancestral Pueblones. Intrigued, I decided to investigate, bringing along my friend and fellow researcher, Carla Mendoza. We arrived at the Whispering Dunes in the early morning, the sun just beginning to rise over the horizon. The desert was eerily silent, the only sounds the occasional gust of wind and the crunch of sand under our boots. The petroglyphs were located in a remote canyon, far from any trails or roads. As we made our way to the site, Carla and I discussed the legends that surrounded this area. The most persistent was the story of the Skinwalker shape-shifting witches, who could assume the forms of animals or even other people. According to the tales, they could control the weather, possess supernatural strength, and move with incredible speed. These stories were often dismissed as mere folklore, but they had a way of lingering in the back of one's mind. When we reached the canyon, we found the petroglyphs just as described, intricate carvings that depicted scenes of daily life, spiritual rituals, and, disturbingly, images of what appeared to be skinwalkers. The figures were tall and menacing, their eyes depicted as glowing orbs. Carla took out her camera and began documenting the carvings while I examined them more closely. The detail was astonishing, and the artistry suggested a deep significance. As I traced the lines with my fingers, I felt a sudden chill, as if a cold wind had swept through the canyon. But the air was still. "Do you feel that?" I asked Carla, who was busy photographing a particularly detailed section. She looked up, puzzled. "Feel what?" "Never mind," I said, shaking off the uneasy feeling. "Let's keep going." We spent the next several hours studying the petroglyphs, piecing together the stories they told. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the heat became oppressive, and we decided to take a break in the shade of a nearby rock formation. As we sat there, eating our lunch and discussing our findings, we heard a strange sound. It was a low, guttural growl, unlike anything I had ever heard in the desert. We exchanged nervous glances. "Probably just a coyote," Carla said, though she didn't sound convinced. We continued our work, but the sense of unease grew stronger. The carvings seemed to take on a life of their own, their eyes following us as we moved. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. By late afternoon, we had documented most of the petroglyphs and decided to head back to our camp. As we packed up our gear, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye, a shadowy figure standing at the edge of the canyon. "Did you see that?" I asked, pointing to where the figure had been. Carla turned, her eyes narrowing. "See what?" "There was someone there, watching us." "David, it's just your imagination," she said, though she looked uneasy. "Let's get out of here." We made our way back to camp, the desert silence now feeling oppressive. As night fell, we set up our tents and built a small fire. The stars were brilliant against the dark sky, but their beauty did little to ease the tension. As we sat by the fire, the growling sound returned, closer this time. We both stood, scanning the darkness. The firelight flickered, casting long shadows across the sand. "Stay close," I said, reaching for my flashlight. We moved slowly around the perimeter of our camp, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The growling grew louder, more insistent, and then we saw them, three figures standing just beyond the light, their eyes glowing a sickly yellow. "Skinwalkers," Carla whispered, her voice trembling. The figures moved closer, their shapes shifting and changing. One moment, they appeared as tall, gaunt humans. The next as large, predatory animals. They advanced slowly, their eyes never leaving us. "We need to get out of here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We grabbed our backpacks and started to move, but the skinwalkers blocked our path. They circled us, their growls echoing in the night. I could feel the panic rising in my chest, but I knew we had to stay calm. "Let's head for the canyon," I said. "Maybe we can lose them there." We moved quickly, the skinwalkers following close behind. The canyon loomed ahead, its dark entrance like a maw waiting to swallow us whole. We ran, the growls of the skinwalkers growing louder, more frenzied. As we entered the canyon, the walls closed in around us, the darkness almost complete. I switched on my flashlight, the beam revealing the petroglyphs we had studied earlier. The carvings seemed to pulse with an eerie light, their eyes glowing in the darkness. We stumbled through the canyon, the skinwalkers' growls echoing off the walls. Suddenly, one of them lunged at us, its claws slashing through the air. I swung my flashlight, hitting it across the face. The creature let out a scream and fell back, giving us a moment to run. We reached a narrow passage and squeezed through, the skinwalkers hot on our heels. The passage opened into a small, enclosed area with a single large rock in the center. We climbed onto the rock, hoping it would offer some protection. The skinwalkers circled the rock, their eyes glowing with malevolent intent. They let out a series of guttural growls, and I felt a cold chill run down my spine. I knew we couldn't stay there forever. "We need to fight back," Carla said, her voice shaking but determined. "We can't let them win." I nodded, gripping my flashlight tightly. "On three," I said. 1, 2, 3. We jumped off the rock, swinging our flashlights and shouting as loudly as we could. The skinwalkers recoiled, their forms shifting and changing. For a moment, it looked like they might retreat, but then they lunged at us again. I swung my flashlight, connecting with one of the skinwalkers' heads. It let out a scream and fell to the ground, its form dissolving into a cloud of smoke. Carla was fighting off another, using her backpack as a shield. I joined her, and together we managed to drive it back. The last skinwalker hesitated, its eyes glowing with a mix of rage and fear. It let out a final, chilling growl before retreating into the darkness. We stood there, panting and trembling, the canyon eerily silent once more. The petroglyphs seemed to watch us, their eyes glowing faintly. "We need to get out of here," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. We made our way back through the canyon, the darkness pressing in around us. When we finally emerged into the open desert, we collapsed to the ground, exhausted and shaken. The rest of the night passed in a blur. We kept the fire burning brightly, staying vigilant until the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon. As soon as it was light enough, we packed up our camp and left the Whispering Dunes, vowing never to return. The experience left a lasting mark on both of us. We reported the encounter to the authorities, but they were skeptical, attributing our ordeal to wild animals or hallucinations. But Carla and I knew the truth. The skinwalkers were real, and they were still out there, lurking in the shadows of the desert. We continued our work as archaeologists, but we never forgot the night we faced the skinwalkers of Shadow Creek. The experience taught us to respect the legends and the unknown forces that inhabit our world. To this day, I share my story with others, hoping to raise awareness and encourage respect for the old traditions. The wilderness is a place of beauty and danger, and it demands respect. And as long as I carry that respect with me, I am ready for whatever the future holds. My name is Ethan Wells, and for as long as I can remember, I've loved the outdoors. Growing up in the rugged landscapes of Utah, I developed a deep appreciation for nature. I became a wildlife photographer, hoping to capture the beauty of the wilderness and share it with the world. Little did I know that one trip would bring me face to face with a legend I never thought was real, the Skinwalker. It was early spring when I received a tip about a secluded valley known as Hollow Creek. The area was rich in wildlife, and I was eager to explore it. My friend and fellow photographer, Jake Thompson, decided to join me. We packed our gear and set off for a week-long expedition. Hollow Creek was remote, far from any roads or trails. We hiked for hours, our packs heavy with camping equipment and camera gear. The deeper we ventured into the valley, the more isolated it felt. The towering pines and jagged cliffs seemed to close in around us, creating a sense of foreboding. We set up camp near a small, crystal-clear stream that wound its way through the valley. As we unpacked, Jake mentioned a story he'd heard from a local Navajo elder about the area. According to the elder, Hollow Creek was a place of power inhabited by Skinwalker shape-shifting witches who could assume the forms of animals or people. I laughed it off, chalking it up to superstition. But Jake looked serious. "Ethan, I've heard these stories my whole life. People swear they've seen them." "Come on, Jake," I said, trying to lighten the mood. "We're here to photograph wildlife, not chase ghost stories." We spent the first few days exploring the valley, capturing stunning images of elk, deer, and a variety of bird species. The weather was perfect, and the scenery was breathtaking. But as the sun set each evening, an uneasy feeling settled over me. The forest grew silent, and the shadows seemed to move of their own accord. On the fourth night, we decided to hike to a nearby ridge to photograph the sunset. The view from the top was spectacular, the sky painted in hues of orange and pink. As the light faded, we packed up our gear and started back to camp. The trail was narrow and winding, the trees pressing in on either side. The darkness was complete, our flashlights the only source of light. As we walked, we heard a sound, a low, guttural growl that sent chills down my spine. "Did you hear that?" Jake whispered, his voice trembling. I nodded, gripping my flashlight tighter. "Probably just a coyote," I said, though I didn't believe it. We continued walking, but the growl followed us, growing louder and more menacing. Then we saw it, a pair of glowing eyes in the darkness, watching us from the trees. I felt a wave of fear wash over me as the creature stepped into the light. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It stood on two legs, but its body was covered in fur. Its face was a twisted mix of human and animal features, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. It let out another growl, and I knew we were in serious trouble. "Run!" I shouted, and we took off down the trail, our flashlights bobbing wildly in the darkness. The creature gave chase, its footsteps echoing through the forest. I could hear its growls growing closer, and I pushed myself to run faster. We burst into our campsite, scrambling to find some semblance of safety. Jake grabbed a stick from the fire and waved it at the creature, trying to keep it at bay. The Skinwalker stopped at the edge of the light, its eyes fixed on us. "We need to get out of here," I said, my voice shaking. "Now!" We grabbed our packs and ran, not daring to look back. The Skinwalker followed, its growls echoing in the night. We reached the stream and followed it, hoping it would lead us to safety. The creature stayed close, its eyes never leaving us. Hours passed, and we were exhausted. We found a small cave and ducked inside, hoping it would provide some protection. The Skinwalker paced outside, its growls filling the air. We huddled together, trying to stay quiet. "We can't stay here," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It will find a way in." "We need a plan," I said, my mind racing. "Maybe we can trap it, or scare it off." We spent the rest of the night planning our escape. As dawn approached, the Skinwalker finally retreated, disappearing into the forest. We waited until the sun was fully up before emerging from the cave, our nerves frayed. We made our way back to camp, hoping the creature was gone for good. But as we packed up our gear, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still watching us. We hiked out of the valley as quickly as we could, never looking back. The experience left a lasting mark on both of us. We reported the encounter to the authorities, but they were skeptical, attributing our ordeal to wild animals or hallucinations. But Jake and I knew the truth. The Skinwalkers were real, and they were still out there, lurking in the shadows of Hollow Creek. We continued our work as photographers, but we never forgot the night we faced the Skinwalkers. The experience taught us to respect the legends and the unknown forces that inhabit our world. To this day, I share my story with others, hoping to raise awareness and encourage respect for the old traditions. The wilderness is a place of beauty and danger, and it demands respect. And as long as I carry that respect with me, I am ready for whatever the future holds. My name is Sarah Green, and I grew up hearing stories of the supernatural. My grandmother, a full-blooded Navajo, would often regale us with tales of skinwalker-swicked beings with the power to transform into any animal they desired. As a child, I found these stories thrilling, but as I grew older, I dismissed them as mere folklore. That was until a summer trip to the Navajo Nation changed everything. I was 25 and working as an ethnographer, studying the cultural practices and traditions of various Native American tribes. My latest assignment brought me to the Navajo Nation in northeastern Arizona. I planned to spend several months there, interviewing elders and documenting their stories. I stayed in a small, remote village called Red Mesa. It was a tight-knit community, steeped in tradition and wary of outsiders. My host was an elderly woman named Elsie Yazzie, who welcomed me into her home with open arms. Elsie was a respected matriarch and a repository of tribal knowledge. She agreed to help me with my research and introduce me to other elders in the community. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Elsie and I sat on her porch, sipping herbal tea. The air was warm, and the sky was painted with hues of orange and purple. I took the opportunity to ask her about the Skinwalker legends. Elsie, can you tell me more about the Skinwalkers? Are they just stories, or is there some truth to them? I asked, trying to sound respectful. Elsie's expression turned serious. Sarah, the Skinwalkers are real. They are not just stories. They are dangerous beings who practice witchcraft and can take on the form of animals. We do not speak of them lightly. Her tone sent a shiver down my spine. Have you ever encountered one? She nodded slowly. Many years ago, when I was a young woman, had an encounter that I will never forget. It is not something I speak of often, but I will tell you if you promise to be careful. I promised, and Elsie began her story. She told me of a night when she and a group of friends were camping near a place called Dead Man's Ridge. They had heard strange noise holes and growls that seemed to come from nowhere. When they returned to their village, they found strange tracks around their campsite. The elders told them they had encountered a skinwalker. As Elsie spoke, I felt a growing sense of unease. Her story was so vivid, so filled with genuine fear, that it was impossible to dismiss. After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the Skinwalker legends than I had thought. A few weeks later, I decided to visit Dead Man's Ridge to see if I could find any clues to support Elsie's story. I brought along my camera, a notebook, and a voice recorder, hoping to document my findings. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not wanting to alarm the villagers. The hike to Dead Man's Ridge was challenging, the terrain rugged and unforgiving. The closer I got, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The air felt thick, and the silence was eerie. I reached the ridge just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the landscape. I set up my equipment and began exploring the area, taking photos and recording my observations. As darkness fell, I felt a growing sense of unease. The sounds of the forest seemed to fade away, replaced by an eerie silence. Suddenly, I heard a low growl. I turned, my heart pounding, but saw nothing. The growl came again, closer this time. I shone my flashlight into the darkness, and my blood ran cold. There, at the edge of the light, was a pair of glowing eyes. I backed away slowly, my flashlight shaking. The eyes moved closer, and I could make out the shape of a large, wolf-like creature. It stood on two legs, its eyes burning with an unnatural light. I realized with horror that I was facing a skinwalker. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest. The creature gave chase, its growls echoing through the night. I stumbled through the forest, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I could hear the Skinwalker behind me, its footsteps growing louder. I reached a clearing and paused to catch my breath. The Skinwalker emerged from the trees, its eyes fixed on me. I remembered Elsie's words and decided to face it head on. I picked up a stick and held it out in front of me, trying to look as threatening as possible. "Stay back," I shouted, my voice trembling. The Skinwalker paused, its eyes narrowing. For a moment, I thought it might retreat, but then it lunged at me. I swung the stick, hitting it across the face. The creature let out a scream and fell back, giving me a chance to run. I ran until I could no longer hear the Skinwalker's growls. Exhausted and terrified, I found a small cave and crawled inside, hoping it would provide some protection. I spent the night huddled in the darkness, every sound making me jump. When dawn finally broke, I emerged from the cave, my body aching and my nerves frayed. I made my way back to Red Mesa, vowing never to return to Dead Man's Ridge. I told Elsie what had happened, and she nodded solemnly. "You are lucky to be alive, Sarah. The Skinwalkers are not to be taken lightly." I spent the rest of my time in the Navajo Nation with a new sense of respect for the legends and traditions. The experience left a lasting mark on me, and I continued my research with a renewed sense of purpose. My name is John Parker, and I live in a small town in southern Colorado. My family has owned Blackwood Ranch for generations. It's a sprawling property nestled between the rugged peaks of the Rockies and the expansive, open plains. Life on the ranch has always been peaceful, filled with hard work and the simple joys of nature. But one summer night, that peace was shattered in a way I never could have imagined. It was late July, and the days were long and hot. We were in the middle of calving season, and every night, my brother Mike and I took turns checking on the herd. It was my turn that night, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, I saddled up my horse, Duke, and set off toward the western pasture. The air was thick with the scent of hay and the distant sounds of crickets and frogs. The full moon cast a pale glow over the landscape, making it easy to navigate without a flashlight. I rode slowly, scanning the shadows for any signs of trouble. As I approached the pasture, I noticed something unusual. The cows, normally calm and docile, were agitated. They milled about nervously, their eyes reflecting the moonlight. Duke snorted and shifted uneasily beneath me, sensing something was amiss. I dismounted and tied Duke to the fence, then approached the herd. That's when I heard Ida low, guttural growl that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. I turned slowly, my heart pounding, and saw a figure lurking at the edge of the trees. At first, I thought it was a wolf. But as it stepped into the moonlight, I realized it was something far more terrifying. It stood on two legs, its body covered in matted fur. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and its face was a twisted blend of human and animal features. I knew instantly what it was: a Skinwalker. I backed away slowly, my mind racing. The stories I'd heard as a child came flooding back. Skinwalkers were powerful and dangerous, witches who could assume the form of any animal they chose. They were said to be nearly impossible to kill, and were known for their cunning and malice. The Skinwalker let out another growl and took a step toward me. I glanced around, looking for something anything could use to defend myself. My eyes landed on a length of rope hanging from the fence. I grabbed it, hoping it might offer some protection. "Stay back," I shouted, my voice trembling. The Skinwalker paused, its eyes narrowing. For a moment, I thought it might retreat. But then it lunged at me with incredible speed. I swung the rope, hitting it across the face. The creature let out a scream and fell back, giving me a chance to run. I sprinted toward Duke, my heart pounding in my chest. The Skinwalker was right behind me, its growls echoing through the night. I untied Duke and jumped onto his back, kicking him into a gallop. We raced across the pasture, the Skinwalker hot on our heels. We reached the barn, and I jumped off, throwing the doors open and leading Duke inside. I slammed the doors shut and barred them, hoping it would keep the creature out. The Skinwalker pounded on the doors, its growls growing louder and more frantic. I grabbed a pitchfork and stood ready, my hands shaking. The Skinwalker eventually stopped pounding and began circling the barn, its eyes glowing through the cracks in the wood. It was testing the structure, looking for a way in. Hours passed, and the Skinwalker didn't relent. I could hear it scraping at the walls, its growls filling the air. I knew I couldn't stay in the barn forever. I had to come up with a plan. I remembered a story my grandfather had told me about a Skinwalker encounter H-had when he was a young man. H managed to drive the creature away using fire. I looked around the barn and saw a lantern hanging on the wall. It was my only chance. I grabbed the lantern and lit it, then opened the doors just enough to slip outside. The Skinwalker was waiting, its eyes fixed on me. I held the lantern out in front of me, the flames flickering in the night. "Stay back," I shouted again. The Skinwalker hesitated, its eyes narrowing. I took a step forward, waving the lantern. The creature let out a hiss and backed away. I kept moving, pushing it back toward the trees. Finally, with a final growl, it turned and disappeared into the forest. I collapsed to the ground, my body shaking with relief. The Skinwalker was gone, at least for now. I knew it could come back, but for the moment, I was safe. I spent the rest of the night in the barn, too afraid to return to the house. When dawn finally broke, I made my way back to the ranch, my mind still reeling from the encounter. I told Mike what had happened, and he listened with wide eyes. "We need to tell the elders," he said. "They'll know what to do." We went to the nearby reservation and spoke with the tribal elders. They took my story seriously and performed a cleansing ceremony to protect the ranch. They warned us to be vigilant and to respect the old traditions. The experience left a lasting mark on me. I continued to work the ranch, but I never forgot that night. The Skinwalker had shown me that there were things in this world that defied explanation, things that demanded respect. My name is Emily Davis, and I live in a small, picturesque town nestled in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains in Virginia. Stone Creek is known for its rolling hills, dense forests, and an air of tranquility that draws tourists and nature enthusiasts year-round. My family has owned a cabin on the outskirts of town for generations. A rustic retreat where we would spend weekends hiking, fishing, and enjoying the natural beauty of the area. It was late autumn when the incident occurred, a time when the air was crisp and the leaves painted the landscape in shades of red, orange, and gold. My husband Jack and I decided to spend a long weekend at the cabin, hoping to unwind and reconnect with nature. Little did we know that our peaceful retreat would turn into a nightmare that we would never forget. We arrived at the cabin late on a Friday afternoon, the sun casting long shadows as it dipped below the horizon. The cabin was just as I remembered it, cozy and welcoming, with a stone fireplace and large windows that offered breathtaking views of the surrounding forest. We unpacked our bags and settled in, eager to relax after the long drive. As night fell, we built a fire and cooked a simple dinner, enjoying the warmth and the crackling of the flames. Afterward, we sat on the porch, sipping hot cocoa and listening to the sounds of the forest. It was a serene and idyllic setting, but there was an undercurrent of unease that I couldn't quite shake. "Jack, have you ever heard any strange stories about this area?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He looked at me with a raised eyebrow. "Strange stories? Like what? Like legends or folklore? You know, spooky stuff." Jack chuckled. "Well, there are plenty of ghost stories and tales of strange creatures, but nothing I'd take seriously. Why do you ask?" I shrugged, trying to downplay my curiosity. "I don't know, just something about this place feels different." Jack took a sip of his cocoa and looked out into the darkening forest. "I wouldn't worry about it. We're miles away from civilization. It's probably just the isolation getting to you. I nodded, but the feeling of unease persisted. We decided to turn in early, hoping a good night's sleep would put my mind at ease. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of rustling outside the cabin. At first, I thought it was just an animal, but the noise grew louder and more deliberate. I sat up, my heart pounding, and listened intently. Jack was still sound asleep beside me, oblivious to the disturbance. The rustling grew closer, and I could hear heavy footsteps crunching through the fallen leaves. I got out of bed as quietly as possible and peeked through the window. What I saw made my blood run cold. There, at the edge of the clearing, stood a figure unlike anything I had ever seen. It was tall and gaunt, with long, matted hair, and glowing eyes that seemed to pierce the darkness. Its body was covered in tattered clothing and patches of fur, and its face was a grotesque blend of human and animal features. I realized with horror that I was looking at a skinwalker. I backed away from the window, my mind racing. The stories my grandmother had told me as a child came flooding back. She had warned me about the skinwalkers, witches who could take on the form of animals and wreak havoc on anyone who crossed their path. I had always dismissed her tales as superstition, but now was faced with the terrifying reality. I shook Jack awake, trying to stay calm. "Jack, wake up. There's something outside." He groaned and rubbed his eyes. "What are you talking about?" "There's something outside the cabin. I think it's a skinwalker." Jack sat up, his expression turning serious. "Are you sure?" I nodded, my voice trembling. "Yes, I saw it. We need to do something." He got out of bed and grabbed the shotgun we kept for protection, checking to make sure it was loaded. "Stay here, I'll go check it out." "Jack, no, it's too dangerous." He gave me a reassuring look. "I'll be fine. Just stay inside and lock the door." I watched as he opened the door and stepped outside, the shotgun at the ready. I locked the door behind him and pressed my ear to the wood, straining to hear what was happening. There was a tense silence, broken only by the sound of Jack's footsteps and the occasional rustle of leaves. Then, I heard a low, guttural growl that sent chills down my spine. Jack shouted something, and there was a loud bang as he fired the shotgun. I heard more growling, followed by another shot. Then, everything went silent. I waited, my heart pounding in my chest. Minutes felt like hours as I stood there, frozen with fear. Finally, I heard Jack's voice calling out to me. "Emily, it's okay. You can come out now." I unlocked the door and stepped outside, my legs trembling. Jack was standing near the edge of the clearing, the shotgun still in his hands. The skinwalker was gone, but there were signs of a struggle, broken branches and disturbed leaves. "What happened?" I asked, my voice shaking. Jack looked at me, his expression grim. I scared it off, but it could come back. "We need to leave now." We packed our things as quickly as possible and left the cabin, driving through the night to get back to town. The experience left us both shaken, and we decided to avoid the cabin for a while. A few weeks later, spoke with an elder from the local Cherokee tribe. I told him what had happened, and he listened carefully, nodding as I described the encounter. "You were wise to leave," he said. "Skinwalkers are powerful and dangerous. They can sense fear and will exploit it. But they can be driven away with fire and bravery." He performed a cleansing ceremony to protect us and our property, and we returned to the cabin only during the day. The encounter left a lasting mark on us, a reminder of the power and mystery of the natural world. My name is Carlos Mendez, and I work as a park ranger in the vast, rugged terrain of the Grand Canyon National Park. It's a job I've loved for the past decade, allowing me to spend my days among some of the most breathtaking landscapes on Earth. I've always had a deep respect for nature, but one fateful encounter forever changed my perception of the wilderness and its hidden dangers. It was early November, and the park was quieter than usual. The summer crowds had long since dispersed, and only a few hardy tourists remained, braving the chilly winds and the occasional snowfall. I was on my usual patrol, driving along the remote dirt roads that crisscross the park's more secluded areas. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm, golden light over the canyons, cliffs, and the winding Colorado River far below. As I rounded a bend, I spotted a solitary hiker making his way down a narrow trail that led to a lesser-known overlook. Something about his movements seemed off, hesitant and jerky, as if he were struggling with an invisible weight. I pulled over and got out of my truck, calling out to him. "Hey there, everything okay?" The hiker froze and slowly turned to face me. His eyes were wild, and his face was gaunt and pale. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Ranger, you've got to help me," he said, his voice trembling. "Something's following me, something not human." I frowned and walked closer, trying to reassure him. "Calm down, sir. Let's get you back to the ranger station. You can tell me what happened there." He shook his head violently. "No, we can't go back. It's out there. It's been watching me. I can feel it." A chill ran down my spine. Over the years, it heard my fair share of strange stories from hikers and campers, but something about this man's terror struck a chord. I decided to take him seriously. "All right, let's get you to safety first. My truck is right over here." We climbed into the truck, and I started driving back towards the ranger station. The hiker introduced himself as Peter Lawson, a travel writer from New York. He'd come to the Grand Canyon for inspiration, but had ended up with more than he'd bargained for. As we drove, Peter told me his story. He'd been camping alone near the rim of the canyon when he started noticing strange noises at night, whispers carried on the wind, footsteps crunching in the gravel, and shadows moving just beyond the reach of his campfire's light. At first, he thought it was just his imagination, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger each night. On the fourth night, He'd woken up to find his campsite in disarray. His tent had been slashed, and his supplies scattered. That's when He'd seen a figure lurking in the shadows, its eyes glowing with an eerie, unnatural light. He'd fled, abandoning most of his gear, and had been wandering the trails ever since, trying to stay ahead of whatever was stalking him. As he spoke, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The road ahead seemed darker, and the shadows longer than usual. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something following us. We finally reached the ranger station, and I helped Peter inside. The station was empty, as most of my colleagues had gone home for the night. I offered him a cup of coffee and a blanket, trying to make him comfortable. "Stay here," I said. "I'm going to call for backup." I stepped outside to get a better signal on my radio. As I tried to reach the nearest ranger post, I heard a faint rustling in the bushes nearby. I turned, my flashlight cutting through the darkness, but saw nothing. The wind picked up, carrying with it a low, haunting whisper that sent shivers down my spine. I quickly made the call and headed back inside, my nerves on edge. Peter was sitting by the window, staring out into the darkness. "It's here," he said softly. "It followed us. Re." I tried to reassure him, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I locked the doors and made sure all the windows were secure. We sat in silence, the tension thick in the air. Hours passed, and the night grew colder. Just as I was beginning to think we might make it through unscathed, there was a loud bang on the roof. Peter and I both jumped, our eyes wide with fear. I grabbed my flashlight and gestured for Peter to stay put. I climbed the ladder to the attic and cautiously opened the hatch. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but dust and cobwebs. I was about to close the hatch when I heard a low, guttural growl, followed by the sound of something scraping against the wood. My heart pounded in my chest as I scanned the attic, but there was no sign of the intruder. I climbed back down and found Peter cowering in the corner. "What was it?" he whispered. "I don't know," I admitted, "but whatever it is, it's trying to scare us." We spent the rest of the night huddled together, listening to the strange noises that seemed to come from all around us. Just before dawn, the sound stopped, and an eerie silence settled over the station. We were exhausted, but too afraid to sleep. When the sun finally rose, I ventured outside to inspect the area. There were no signs of footprints or any indication that something had been on the roof. It was as if the night's events had been a bad dream. Peter and I decided to leave the park and head back to civilization. As we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time and saw a figure, standing at the edge of the forest, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. We never spoke of that night again, but the memory haunted me for years. I continued my work as a park ranger, always keeping an eye out for anything unusual. The wilderness is a place of beauty and mystery, but it also holds dangers that defy explanation. To this day, I share my story with others, hoping to raise awareness and encourage respect for the natural world. The legends of the Skinwalkers are not just tales to be dismissed, they are warnings. Reminders that there are forces in the world that we do not fully understand. And as long as we respect those forces, we can coexist with the wild and untamed beauty of Natu. My name is James Hartman, and I'm a retired police officer living in Elkhorn, Wisconsin. Elkhorn is a small, quiet town surrounded by dense woods and farmland. It's the kind of place where everyone knows each other, and nothing much ever happens, at least, that's what I used to think. In the fall of 1992, I had an experience that changed my life forever, an encounter with something that defied all logic and reason. I had always prided myself on my rationality and my ability to stay calm under pressure. But that night, all my training and experience meant nothing. It was a cold, clear night in late October. The air was crisp, and the sky was dotted with stars. I was driving home after a late shift, taking the back roads to avoid the main highway. The route took me down Bray Road, a narrow, winding road that cut through the woods on the outskirts of town. As I drove, I thought about nothing in particular, enjoying the solitude and the peacefulness of the night. Suddenly, my headlights caught something up ahead, something that made me slam on the brakes. Standing in the middle of the road was a creature unlike anything I had ever seen. It was tall, at least 7 feet, with a muscular, humanoid body covered in dark, matted fur. Its face was a grotesque blend of human and canine features, with glowing yellow eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. Its hands or paws ended in long, sharp claws, and its mouth was filled with razor-sharp teeth. For a moment, I just sat there, frozen in shock and disbelief. The creature stared back at me, unblinking and unmoving. Then, with a low, menacing growl, it took a step towards my car. I snapped out of my daze and fumbled for my radio, my hands shaking. "Dispatch, this is Officer Hartman. I'm on Bray Road, and there's something," I trailed off, unsure of how to describe what I was seeing. The creature took another step closer, and I could see its muscles ripple under its fur. It was clearly a predator, and I had no doubt that it could easily tear me apart if it wanted to. I threw the car into reverse and backed up as quickly as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. The creature followed, moving with the speed and grace that belied its size. It was almost as if it was toying with me, enjoying the chase. Just when I thought I couldn't go any further, the creature stopped and let out a blood-curdling howl. I slammed on the brakes again and watched as it turned and disappeared into the woods. Its glowing eyes, the last thing I saw before it vanished into the darkness. I sat there for a few minutes, trying to process what had just happened. My rational mind struggled to make sense of it, but there was no logical explanation for what I had seen. I knew I had encountered the beast of Bray Road, a creature that had been the subject of local legends and rumors for years. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing. When I got home, I poured myself a stiff drink and tried to calm my nerves. I knew I had to report the incident, but I also knew that no one would believe me. I could already imagine the ridicule and disbelief I would face. The next morning, I went to the station and filed my report, leaving out the more unbelievable details. I described the creature as a large, unidentified animal and requested an investigation. My colleagues were skeptical, but they agreed to check it out. Over the next few days, there were several more sightings of the creature, and the story quickly spread through the town. People were scared, and the local media had a field day with the reports. The Beast of Bray Road had become more than just a legend. It was now a very real and terrifying presence in our community. The hours passed slowly, and I began to doubt my plan. Just as I was about to call it a night, I heard a rustling in the bushes nearby. I grabbed my camera and aimed it at the sound, my finger hovering over the shutter button. Out of the darkness, the creature emerged, moving silently and gracefully. I snapped several photos, my hands shaking with excitement and fear. The creature paused, its ears twitching as if it sensed my presence. Then, with a growl, it turned and bounded back into the woods. I knew I had to act quickly. I grabbed the tranquilizer gun and followed, my heart pounding in my chest. The creature's glowing eyes were like beacons in the darkness, guiding me through the dense underbrush. I finally caught up to it in a small clearing, and without hesitation, I aimed and fired. The tranquilizer dart hit the creature in the shoulder, and it let out a roar of pain and anger. It turned to face me, its eyes burning with rage. For a moment, I thought it was going to attack, but then its movements became sluggish, and it stumbled. I watched as it collapsed to the ground, its breathing heavy and labored. I approached cautiously, my adrenaline still pumping. Up close, the creature was even more terrifying, its massive frame dwarfing me. I took several more photos, documenting every detail. I knew I had to get help, but I also knew that time was running out. I radioed for backup and waited, keeping a close eye on the creature. As the tranquilizer took full effect, its breathing slowed, and it slipped into unconsciousness. When my colleagues arrived, we carefully loaded the creature into a transport cage and took it to a secure location. The news of its capture spread quickly, and soon the town was buzzing with excitement and curiosity. The creature was examined by experts, who were baffled by its existence. It was unlike any known species, a true enigma. Theories ranged from a genetic mutation to a creature from another dimension, but no one could say for sure. I spent the next few weeks patrolling the area, hoping to catch another glimpse of the creature and gather more evidence. But despite my efforts, it remained elusive, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. One night, I decided to take a different approach. I set up a stakeout near the area where I had first seen the creature, armed with a camera and a tranquilizer gun. I knew it was a long shot, but I had to try. Despite the mystery, one thing was certain: the Beast of Bray Road was real, and it had left a lasting impact on our community. The sightings and encounters continued to be a topic of fascination and fear, a reminder that there are still many unknowns in our world. As for me, I retired from the police force a few years later, but the memory of that night remains vivid in my mind. I often think about the creature and what it represented: a glimpse into the unknown. A reminder that there are still mysteries to be uncovered. I continue to share my story, hoping to raise awareness and encourage respect for the natural world. The Beast of Bray Road is a symbol of the wild and untamed, a reminder that there are forces beyond our understanding. And as long as we respect those forces, we can coexist with the beauty and mystery of nature.